Hello and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Anna Jabłońska. Poles across the country are celebrating Armed Forces Day. We will talk about the military parade in Warsaw and the latest equipment purchased by the Polish army. All that and more in a minute, but first let's look at tonight's headlines. More than 2,000 troops marched through Warsaw to mark Polish Armed Forces Day. Kamala Harris pushes ahead of Donald Trump in recent U.S. presidential elections poll. And Ukraine says it now controls over 1,000 square kilometers of Russia's Kursk region. F-35s, F-16s, the newest helicopters, tanks and howitzers. All this most modern equipment was on display today in Warsaw, where Poland's capital hosted its annual military parade, with Polish soldiers marching alongside Allied troops.
Decydować będzie o dalszych losach całej Polski.
Crowds of Poles gathered today near the Vistula River in downtown Warsaw to see what the Polish armed forces had prepared for them.
We live in such times. We need to show the aggressor, basically, that we are strong, we are prepared. Also, Polish people want to be safe, feel safe. So, great move from organizers. Thank you.
I liked the parade very much. This is the third one we've seen. We think it's amazing and we strongly support it.
The holiday was set on August 15th to celebrate the Polish victory over the Bolsheviks in 1920. Today, the parade has one more goal.
It's also about deterrence. The point is to show the strength of the Polish army and to send a signal that if push comes to shove, we have the equipment we need to defend our country.
In the days leading up to Polish Armed Forces Day, Warsaw signed contracts for new military equipment, including Patriot launchers and Apache helicopters.
Our newly purchased tanks and howitzers were on display. The Abrams tank, a newer, upgraded version of the Leopard tank, and the K2 Black Panther made in Korea. There's more equipment coming to our country every year.
As part of the celebrations, President Andrzej Duda awarded Admiral Rob Bauer, the chair of the NATO Military Committee, with the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland. We've seen Allied forces take part in this parade. We've seen soldiers from the United Kingdom, the United States, from Romania. We've seen the most modern equipment the Polish army has. We've seen F-16 fighter jets, but we've also seen American F-35 jets flying by the Vistula River here in Warsaw. Today, Poland did not just show off its newest military equipment. It also demonstrated the strength of its alliances.
Today marks the 104th anniversary of the pivotal Battle of Warsaw, which saw the Polish armed forces successfully repel the Red Army. Every year, the victory is celebrated in Poland as National Armed Forces Day.
In the Polish capital, August 15 celebrations began with a holy mass for the homeland, followed by a ceremonial changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and a military parade featuring over 2,000 soldiers and 200 military units. Commemorative events were also held at locations historically tied to the Battle of Warsaw and in all major cities.
It's something that is ingrained in Polish society. Without the armed forces, especially looking back into history, without the armed forces we wouldn't really be here today, would we?
When independent Poland was reborn in 1918, its very existence was threatened by Bolshevik Russia. For the Bolsheviks, Poland was the first step on the path towards the conquest of Europe, under the guise of spreading the self-determination of nations. The Polish victory at the Battle of Warsaw stopped the spread of Bolshevism into Western Europe and is a key element of Poland's historical memory.
104 years ago, the resurgent Polish state managed to defend itself against the Bolshevik invasion. It was a glorious victory. The Polish-Bolshevik War was the only war that the Soviet Russia lost as a formal belligerent in its 74-year history. We know full well that Poland, its newly regained independence, and all of Europe, and perhaps even our entire civilization of freedom, owe its survival to that victory.
As the Red Army approached Warsaw and the nearby Modlin fortress, it was met by Polish forces led by Marshal Józef Piłsudski. Piłsudski, who later became the chief of state, was instrumental to the creation of the Second Polish Republic. The Battle of Warsaw began on August 13, with the Bolshevik assault on the town of Radzymin. On August 16, Polish forces counterattacked from the south, disrupting the enemy's offensive and causing the Russians to retreat and panic. The battle ended on August 25, 1920, when Polish forces reached the Prussian border. More Polish victories followed, resulting in a peace treaty that secured Poland's eastern border for 2 decades. In an exclusive TVP World interview, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski spoke about the similarities between Bolshevik invasion of Poland and Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
There are some parallels. We were helped at the time by our Western allies. We received equipment, uniforms from France, ammunition from others, and Ukraine is getting considerable support. We could do even more. And Ukraine is resisting very bravely, and hopefully the result will be similar.
Just as Poland was able to protect Europe from the Bolshevik invasion, Ukraine is now at the front line of Europe's fight with Putin's imperialism.
Ukrainian forces continue to advance in the Kursk region despite Moscow's efforts to rapidly deploy reinforcements to the area. Russian authorities have ordered the mandatory evacuation of civilians in another of the region's districts. Ukrainian troops now control more than 1,000 square kilometers of Russian land and some 74 settlements.
Fighting in Russia's Kursk region has expanded to another district. Ukrainian soldiers captured the village of Venezatnoy, west of where the main fighting is underway. 10 days into the operation, the fighting in Kursk is still dynamic, in stark contrast to static trench warfare characterizing most of the front line in Ukraine.
It certainly showed that Ukraine is capable of counterattacking, that Ukraine has maneuverable forces. It seems that Russia is being forced to draw forces away from the Donetsk front, relieving the brave Ukrainian soldiers fighting there.
Ukrainian troops have also captured a large number of prisoners of war. Entire Russian platoons have been surrendering, which is unseen in the trenches.
Control point. Walk in one line. Carefully. Don't be scared.
The scale of surrenders may be explained by the fact that Kursk is defended by second-rate Russian units, including conscripts. While prisoner exchanges have been taking place regularly, Russia has captured more Ukrainians than vice versa, complicating the process for Kyiv. Russian soldiers captured in Kursk will allow Ukraine to free more of its fighters. Kyiv stated that the purpose of the operation is to establish a security zone along its border, protecting regions neighbouring Russia from attacks. Additionally, captured Russian territory could be exchanged for Russian-occupied lands in possible peace negotiations.
So far, Russia has not really called for negotiations, but for Ukraine's capitulation, which is obviously unacceptable to the Ukrainian side. At the moment, the negotiations are taking place on the battlefield.
The Ukrainian advance has led to the governor of the Kursk region to order a mandatory evacuation of the Glishkovy district. Meanwhile, the neighbouring Belgorod region has been put under a state of emergency. Ukrainian troops are now occupying more than 1,000 square kilometres of Russian territory and are responsible for the civilian population living there.
In order to ensure law and order and the primary needs of the local population in the territories under Ukraine's control, Military Commandant's Office was created. Major General Edward Moskaliov was appointed as its chief.
Kyiv has stated that its troops are already supplying people living in the occupied area with food and other necessities. Ukraine is also planning to open humanitarian corridors, allowing for the evacuation of civilians, both to Ukrainian territory and to the Russian-controlled areas.
And for more on that, we go live to our Ukraine correspondent in Kiev, Oz Katarji. Hello, Oz. Now, we just heard about the territory and troops Kiev has captured in the Kursk offensive. What are the chances Ukrainian forces can keep up this momentum?
Well, there's been further momentum announced today by the Commander-in-Chief, General Syrsky. Saw just a clip of him there saying that we're now up to 1,150 square kilometers and up to 80 settlements captured today to show that there is still movement, slower than the opening days, but there is still appearing to be day by day some incremental gains. I think the bigger clue, the indication about whether Ukraine plans to try and sustain this longer, is the establishment of this military administration for Kursk, this Ukrainian military administration. And also, Ukraine is trying to make a distinction between the way it's conducting itself with these humanitarian corridors and the way Russia conducted itself when it entered into Ukrainian territory in February 2022. So whether or not Ukraine is going to have success in holding on to these territories remains to be seen. But they certainly are putting in place measures now that indicates this is not just a short-term operation.
Oz, thank you very much for your live report. It's all very interesting. Please keep us up to date on the situation. Take care. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris has taken a lead over Donald Trump in a majority of key swing states. Since taking over the presidential race from Joe Biden, Harris has consistently narrowed the gap in the lead that the Republican nominee had for months.
Kamala Harris has the momentum on her side. According to the latest polls, she has topped or tied former President Donald Trump in all but one battleground state. The sole exception is Nevada, where Trump still holds a slim lead, though Harris has narrowed Trump's margin by 6 points since May. Yet experts warn that Harris and her team need to remain focused.
But I need to caution everyone that, anything can happen over the next 80 days or so. And the biggest proof of that is that so many things that have happened in the last 80 to 100 days. This campaign is not over.
Trump, meanwhile, is stomping hard in swing states to close the gap and sway voters back his way. He appeared in Asheville, North Carolina, Wednesday afternoon, a state he won by fewer than 1.4 percentage points in 2020. Meanwhile, vice presidential nominee Tim Walz has said he would debate his Republican rival J.D. Vance on October 1st, one of 4 dates proposed by CBS News.
Normally vice presidential nominees don't matter, and historically they're good for 1% of public opinion one way or the other. Now, 1% looms large when you're talking about a hotly competitive race.
The presidential race is more than likely to be a close one, in which a handful of states decide the next leader of the U.S. It's going to be a roller coaster ride between now and November.
There are warnings this evening that hybrid attacks on the West by Russian-backed hackers and criminal groups will increase. This comes on the heels of revelations that Poland's top athletes had been targeted in a high-level doping disinformation campaign.
Poland's Olympians returned to Warsaw earlier this week, where they were welcomed by Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Information has emerged that while they were competing for their country, elite athletes were targeted by a high-level disinformation campaign after the National Anti-Doping Agency was hacked.
The data is being used by cyber criminals for various purposes, including widespread disinformation. Fake news has appeared discrediting Polish athletes.
Analysts warn that Russian intelligence agencies are seeking to sow more mayhem in Europe by increasing the number of hybrid attacks on Poland and its allies.
We are at war with Russia, and in the near future we have to expect more and more aggressive actions planned and carried out by the Kremlin.
Poland has come under sustained attack this year. An inferno razed the giant Marywilska 44 shopping mall to the ground. A soldier was fatally stabbed by a migrant while guarding the border with Belarus. Hackers hit the Polish press agency, posting fake news about a partial mobilization of 200,000 men to be sent to fight in Ukraine. And TVP's online broadcast of Poland's opening match in the Euro 2024 Championships was disrupted by a cyber gang. In Germany, a military base near Cologne airport was temporarily sealed off yesterday over fears its water supply had been sabotaged following a break-in.
There is a 24-hour monitoring service, and they received a report that there were abnormal levels in this water. That's when the alarm was raised.
NATO and the EU have warned against malign activity by Moscow and the Kremlin's capacity to sow chaos across Europe.
German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser wants to continue to allow for tighter border controls with neighboring countries. The plan, however, has come under fire by the Greens in Berlin, causing a rift in the ruling coalition.
Berlin was allowed by the European Commission to introduce limited checks in response to rising asylum applications in 2023. However, Nancy Faeser, Germany's Interior Minister, has no plans to remove the restrictions. Germany will retain stationary border controls with Poland, Austria, Switzerland and the Czech Republic. The Greens, a coalition partner in the German government, have now sought the help of the European Commission in the matter. In a statement for TVP World, a Green politician has shared their policy and demands.
It is one thing to increase the control pressure on hooligans, potential terrorists and other criminals with temporary border controls, and another to try to reduce migration for years with stationary controls at 2,000 kilometres of internal border. Instead, we are therefore calling for mobile controls. They are more targeted and selective where they can be effective against the most serious crime, while stationary controls are simply bypassed.
Faeser believes the measures are working, citing that asylum claims are down 20% less compared to the same time last year. The Interior Ministry is counting on the EU's new migration pact to bite before it plans any changes. This, however, would likely only be at the end of 2025. Until Brussels makes any decisions, the fallout will sour relations within the German government coalition.
A Polish package delivery giant announced it has become a sponsor of Atletico Madrid, the third most successful club in Spanish football.
The name of a Polish parcel locker operator will soon be on display at the stadium of Atletico, a club which in recent years has grown to become a global name, having most recently won the Spanish top-tier La Liga in the 2020-2021 season.
You are asking me that I'm an Atletico supporter, so I can say that is the biggest club in the world. But coming back to reality, as everybody knows, Real Madrid and Barcelona are the biggest Spain club and also, I guess, in the world. But Atletico is the third one, I guess, in this queue.
Atletico Madrid also plays in the world's most competitive football tournaments.
Atletico will play in the most prestigious competitions in the world. They will play in the Spanish League, the La Liga. They will also play in the Champions League. And also, Atletico de Madrid will participate in the Club World Cup, which will take place in the summer of 2025.
This is another stepping stone for the Polish company InPost, after sponsoring Tour de France and England's Newcastle United. Football seems to be an easy way for enterprises to quickly increase brand awareness.
The beauty of football is that football is a very strong on the European market. So we have a very big user base and client base, customer base in this market.
But the sponsorship deal might soon surpass the Polish company's expectations. According to many experts, Atletico is believed to be on the course to a very successful season.
And now let's return to our main story. 104 years have passed since the Battle of Warsaw on August 15, 1920. The Bolsheviks were stopped at the gates of Warsaw. The battle is considered the 18th decisive battle of the world. And joining me to talk about that important moment is Marek Wierzbicki, a professor of history at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. Good evening, Professor. Thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Good evening.
Now, to put it into perspective for our viewers, because we are watched all around the world, how significant was this battle, not only for Poland, but also Europe?
I think it was one of the most important battles in the history of Europe, because in 1920, the Russian imperial expansion was stopped by the Polish troops, the Polish armies, on the line of the Vistula River, on the suburb of Warsaw. And this changed the history of Europe because Russians planned to organize a lot of revolutions, workers' uprisings against the capitalist system and to create similar Bolshevik Soviet republics across Europe. And the situation in Germany was very promising for the Soviets, with a lot of strikes, demonstrations, and the German workers' will to fight against the capitalist system. And suddenly, the Polish troops stopped the successful Russian armies in the suburb of Warsaw, and thus all the plans of the Soviet political leadership were crossed, were frustrated.
Now, at that time, in 1920, many did not believe it was possible for Poland to stop the Bolsheviks. Why?
First of all, many Poles were really enthusiastic about the policy of Marshal Piłsudski, at that time the military and political leader of Poland, because Piłsudski tried to make Poland a kind of a regional empire with a group of smaller states under the Polish patronage in Eastern Europe to push Russia back far to the east, and thus to reduce Russia's military and imperial ambitions to conquer Poland as well as a big part of Europe. But suddenly, later on, it turned out that Piłsudski's plans were frustrated by the Soviets, who organized a successful offensive, and the front line, the Polish-Russian front line, moved within several weeks, from July till the middle of August, for about 300 kilometers from the middle of Belarus and Ukraine up to the suburb of Warsaw on the line of the Vistula River. And so everybody was convinced, including Western political leaders and practically all military leaders as well, were convinced that Poland would not be able to withstand the Russian pressure and would collapse in a matter of several weeks. So everybody was surprised, both in Poland and in Europe, that suddenly there was such an unexpected turn in this war, and the Poles organized a counteroffensive that became really effective and pushed Russians back again far to the east.
Now, is it fair to compare that situation from 1920 to the situation that Ukraine is right now?
Oh, it's hard to answer, but we've got the same situation as regards the Russian military ambitions, imperial ambitions actually. And in 1920, they wanted to organize a new kind of a Russian empire. And also nowadays, Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, would like to expand to the east, to the west, sorry. But one element is important. Both in 1920 and nowadays, Ukraine is a key factor that can decide about Russia's imperial might. Because in 1920, Lenin and other Bolshevik leaders in Russia realized that Ukraine was necessary for Russia, for the Bolshevik Russia, in order to make it a strong, powerful empire and to carry out a successful offensive towards the West, and in order to conquer many countries of Central and Western Europe. And nowadays, this is the same situation. Russia, with its leader, Vladimir Putin, realizes that there is no Russian empire without Ukraine. Ukraine is once again necessary for them. And that's why Ukraine, first of all, should realize that it is better for Ukraine to fight not against the Poles, but to cooperate with them against Russia, because we've got the common enemy. And at the same time, it is better not to fight alone against Russia, because Ukraine is not able to stop the Russian invasion without external help, the help of NATO and other countries of the world.
No, it's amazing, as we're talking about it right now, 140 years have passed, but it seems when it comes to Russia, the mentality did not change at all.
Yes, actually, the mentality of Russians is exactly the same as 104 years ago. This deep conviction that Russia is entitled, Russia has a right to expand to the West and to conquer the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, treated as the Russian zone of influence. It was also the case in August and September 1939, when Nazi Germany concluded a non-aggression treaty with the Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, and that was the main cause, the main reason for the outbreak of the Second World War. And Poland then was attacked from both west and east and partitioned and occupied. And then Poland lost its sovereignty. So Russia's mentality and Russia's aims, plans, ambitions have been the same for the last 300 years.
That's amazing. Now, we live in a different times. We live in a different world right now. But what lesson can be drawn from the events of 1920?
First of all, that we should be ready to defend ourselves to any aggression, but the real aggression may come from the east, first of all, actually from Russia. So we should be ready to fight. We should be prepared very well in terms of buying, of course, very costly military equipment, modern equipment, but also to prepare the whole of the Polish society for the defense, thus preparing ordinary people to fight for their own freedom in many ways, of course, in many positions, situations. So it also concerns the civil defense that it should be organized, but also the Polish army. But it needs, in my view, first of all, a very long education and wise education of the young generation of Poles, so that they would like to fight for their own freedom as well as Poland's.
Well, at the end, I want to ask you, I have this quote from historian Norman Davis, and he says, here I quote, "People simply haven't learned about it. It's not in the textbooks, and we continue to suffer from this, as it were, black hole of non-awareness." Would you agree with that quote, what Professor Norman Davis said, speaking of education?
Yeah. Yes, it is true that this is quite amazing to me, hardly understandable when I observe how people in the West, but in Poland, are unaware of the still existing danger from the East and from Russia, from its imperial ambitions, as if people have learned nothing from the past experiences. So it is true, actually, and I am not happy with that history teaches nothing and no one. And I think we should do our best to change the situation.
Sir, on that note, we have to finish right here. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us this history lesson. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And thank you for watching World News Tonight. Stay with TVP World for more.